I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Planning Commission on Tuesday, December the 5th. Bobby, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I will.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Except for the people that...
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Knudsen?
Present.
Commissioner Monette?
Here.
Commissioner Pont?
Here.
Vice Chair Hardy?
Here.
Chair Kistner?
Here. Now, the next item is public forum. This is an opportunity for the public to address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on this agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the Commission may not engage in discussion nor take action on matters not described on the agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. Is there any public comment? Closed public comment. The next items are consent items. 4.1 is the approval of minutes, and I would like to pull that. 4.2 is a request by Fischer Architecture for design review approval to perform an exterior renovation of an existing residence and landscape improvements at 1843 Spring Mountain Court and in the medium-density residential zone. 4.3, request by Troy Waters for adoption of a resolution approving design review in order to accommodate a remodel and addition to the home located at 1178 Hudson Avenue in the medium-density residential district. Does anyone want to pull any item? Anyone out there want to pull any item? Do I hear a motion to approve 4.
Could we pull 4.2 for discussion?
Do you want 4.2 pulled? All right. Do I hear a motion to approve item 4.3?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Chair Hardy?
Yes.
Commissioner Monette?
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen?
Yes.
Commissioner Pont?
Yes.
Chair Kistner?
Yes. I pulled 4.1 because the minutes indicate that I talked to Miss Olford. I did not talk to her. It said that we emailed. That's not true. I talked to her on the telephone, I believe, twice. So I would like the minutes to be to reflect that.
Noted.
David, you pulled 4.2?
Yeah, I'd just like to get a description of the project, if I could, from the planning.
And like to get what?
Say that. A description of the project.
The staff planner on it was consultant planner Bianco. She had to leave the office early today, and so senior planner Heacock will fill in.
Okay. The applicant Fischer Architecture is requesting design review approval to perform an exterior renovation and perform landscape improvements at 1843 Spring Mountain Court. Proposed changes include replacing the existing roof with a new standing seam metal roof, residing of the residence in stained wood rain screen siding, replace all existing windows and doors with new aluminum windows and doors, introduce a trellis system at the front entrance of the property and at the rear of the property, remove approximately 3,500 square feet of lawn and gravelled areas and replace those with vegetable and fruit plantings, introduce fencing panels to define backyard vegetable beds. No changes to the building footprint or height are proposed, and the project does not pose any substantial design issues. All modifications would be consistent with general plan policy and zoning standards as detailed in the staff report. Because the materials and design elements are appropriate for residential character of the existing property and would not substantially alter from the form or massing or siding of the existing residence, it would meet all applicable design review findings. Therefore, the Planning and Community Improvement Department recommends that the Planning Commission find the project exempt from CEQA and approve design review for the modifications proposed at 1843 Spring Mountain Court.
So I like the new design. I think it's a fantastic upgrade. The pool isn't included as part of the, and yet it's part of the landscape plan, it appears. I'm just curious. The pool appears to be part of the landscape plan, the new pool.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's included in the landscape plan. It very well may be. Pools are permitted by right in the district, so
Right.
That's not part of the design review application.
Okay, great, thank you.
Do I hear a motion to approve 4.1 as adjusted and 4.2?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes. Next item is public hearings. 5.1, mitigated negative declaration, design review and use permit applications requesting approval to construct an approximately 9,500 square foot addition to an existing 111,000 square foot building to operate a custom crush winemaking facility capable of making 120,000 gallons of wine, located at 420 La Fata, 890 Dowdell Lane in southeast St. Helena. May I have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Kistner, members of the Commission and the public. As you mentioned, the project before you tonight is the St. Helena Custom Crush. This is an item that was continued from November 7th, 2017. And I'm just trying to get the PowerPoint to advance. There we go. As mentioned, it's a mitigated negative declaration, design review, and use permit applications with a proposal to construct 9,500 square foot addition to an existing 100,000 square foot building to operate a custom crush winemaking facility capable of making up to 120,000 gallons of wine or 50,000 cases, located at 420 La Fata Street, which is also addressed at 890 Dowdell Lane. It's important to note that no wine tasting or visitation is permitted with this application. The location is, as mentioned, 420 La Fata and 890 Dowdell. This is one of the two industrial land use designations in the city, indicated here with the red star. This map shows the land use designations, the gray being industrial, purple being service commercial, and green being agriculture. So you can see it is buffered by agricultural and service commercial uses before you get into any of the residential uses, which are indicated in orange. This is an aerial photograph of the existing property. This is the location of the proposed addition. There's a stormwater detention basin at the intersection of Dowdell and La Fata, which you can see there. And then this is the location of the proposed office, currently occupied by Britain Tree Service. This is the site plan. Similarly, just looking at it from straight on, the yellow line outlines the existing warehouse building. Red line would be the addition, the office space, and the stormwater detention basin. No changes since the continuance. You will recall that the project was continued to allow additional public comment due to the North Bay firestorm impacts, which occurred during the public comment period on the CEQA document. This is the same site plan, but just a simplified version identifying the roof lines. And then these are the building elevations. It is conditioned to be designed in a board and bat style. No specific materials are required, and you'll recall a presentation from the architect identified that they would prefer metal siding, but of a design that does implement the condition of board and bat. There are some cupolas and other architectural features to add interest and fit into the design aesthetic that is very common here in St. Helena. As identified in the staff report and the previous presentation, the site is designated for industrial and is very much in keeping with the viticultural support services, which are a proposed element of the project. Staff does find the project to be consistent with the general plan. Similarly, the project is zoned industrial and has very similar land use designations and purpose. This is what the industrial designation is. The purpose of that zoning district is also intended to provide viticulture support services. As mentioned, the mitigated negative declaration was drafted by a consultant planner M Group, Olivia Irvin. She is here to answer any questions on the environmental document. Originally circulated for 30 days from September to October, but extended for an additional 2-week period, which I believe ended from the November 7th to November 20th, I believe.
24th, I think.
24th, thank you. Staff did initiate consultation with the local tribal groups. We received one response. They reviewed the project and didn't ask for any further consultation. The Planning Commission, as mentioned, reviewed the project on November 7th. Held the public hearing, or opened the public hearing, continued it, leaving the public hearing open, to today. There was some concerns voiced over the CEQA analysis and some of the conditions of approval. In response, staff did make some minor edits to the CEQA analysis, and there are some additional conditions of approval that have been circulated on the dais that were requested by 2 specific commissioners. The applicants have had a chance to review those. And then there was also 2 additional letters that came in, one voicing support for the project and one voicing general concerns over primarily the wastewater capability and capacity to serve this site. There is a very thorough response to comments prepared in the final CEQA initial study and mitigated negative declaration, which is before the commission, prepared by Ms. Irvin. And the comment letter that voiced the concerns, unfortunately, contained some inaccurate information, so staff has clarified that in the response. We're happy to discuss that further if the commission sees fit or the public has any specific questions, and that is all before the commission. As you'll recall, the primary issue that was identified by staff was the location of the detention basin. It's not a structure, so the basin itself wasn't subject to the setbacks. However, the industrial zoning district does have very prescriptive fencing requirements specific to the front setback. They're actually the most restrictive in the code, limited to 3 feet. However, a 5-foot fence is required per the building code. Given the depth of the detention basin, it's similar to residential swimming pool protections. Staff does support the proposed fence design based on the intent of the code. The detention basin location, given the intent of the code, the extensive landscaping that it's proposing, and staff does identify some zoning flexibility, although not directly applicable. It kind of provides some examples where the commission can extend the allowable heights of certain features of structures and fences, although not specifically referencing the industrial district. That is identified in the zoning code. Generally, staff is supportive of the project. This is a kind of an elevation of the detention basin fencing. There was some concerns over maybe the depiction with the height of the cars voiced at the last meeting. You can see maybe a more accurate depiction would be the height of the individual walking past in the background. But it is recommended by the Planning and Community Improvement Department that the Planning Commission accept the analysis and findings identified in the initial study, approve the associated mitigated negative declaration, and accept the required findings and approve the use permit and design review for the proposed Santa Helena Custom Crust project at 420 La Fata and 890 Dowdell Lane in southeast Santa Helena. The applicants are here and in discussions with the Planning Commission chair. The commission may want to hear the presentation from the applicants prior to asking questions. It's up to the commission, but if you would like to just get all presentations information presented and then ask questions, that is an option. But I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any now.
I think that we'll just start with the applicant, please.
Okay.
Good evening, Chairman Kistner, members of the Commission, and staff. I'm Donna Oldford. I'm a planning consultant from St. Helena, and I'm here tonight representing the St. Helena Custom Crush project. And we have several people with us here tonight from our team. Nat Comas is here representing, he's the applicant. We have Tom Faherty from Valley Architecture and Architects, and Andy Simpson from Delta Engineering, and they're here to answer specific questions that you may have, as I am. Peter Gallagher is also here. I'm not going to say he's our team because he's your consultant. So he's here to answer any questions you might have about the traffic. I think Noah has been very thorough in covering the project at the last hearing and tonight too. As you know, we're proposing a maximum of 120,000 gallons or 50,000 cases of wine for custom crush, and we do have a sort of full capability facility here. We envision receiving the fruit, crushing it, fermenting the fruit, barrel aging, and then bottling before it leaves the facility. Part of the existing project, of course, is a wine warehouse, and currently they store case goods exclusively. We are in the industrial park. We think it's a really excellent use in this area. It's associated, it's important to agriculture. We have a great demand for custom crush, and it has become very challenging for people to find places where they can do custom crush where they're happy. I know just since the last hearing, I was rather surprised. I received calls from a number of people who were interested in the project. They weren't aware of it before, but more people are watching than you think. So we think it's a really good use. We think it's a use that is reflective of the primary economic engine of the Napa Valley. And as Noah mentioned to you, because it's the industrial park, the industrial district zoning does not allow any marketing events or any tours and tastings of this facility. So we don't have any of that. That's not allowed, and we have not proposed it, of course. To our knowledge, we don't have any neighborhood opposition. We talked with quite a few people. You have a letter from one of our closest neighbors in support, Tom Redmond. I guess the issues from the last hearing were we had some questions about the retention pond and the fence around that. And, of course, as Noah has mentioned, the fence is a requirement for public safety purposes. And we have put quite a bit of landscaping in there so that it serves as a sort of landscape feature as well as a necessary engineering appurtenance. There was some question about the fence, an 8-foot fence that would separate the uses on the east side of the property. And for those of you who have seen the site, you may have noticed that there's a line of redwood trees along that fence, and they actually provide an excellent visual buffer and perceptive buffer from the winery on the other side of us to the east. If we put an 8-foot fence in there, we're going to do quite a bit of disturbance to the shallow root structure of those redwood trees. So we're suggesting that we think the redwood trees suffice for what a fence would do, and that we could be asking for problems with the viability of those trees by erecting a fence there. We had some questions about noise, and as we stated last week, we are subject, as is everyone, to the city's noise ordinance. And as Noah can point out to you, the standard, we're actually below the standard by about 2 decibels. So we are subject to that. And since we are in an industrial park, we are not surrounded by what is typically thought of as a more sensitive noise receptor, such as a residential area or a hospital, that sort of thing. Traffic analysis, we had quite a bit of discussion about traffic and a lot of opinion as to how we should be analyzing traffic. We are obligated, we being the collective we're obligated to evaluate according to the requirements of CEQA, the State Environmental Quality Act, and also we take our direction from your staff who tells us the scope of work that they wish to see that's specific to the project and the environment. And as you know from reading that analysis, we do not have potentially significant impacts associated with this project. We had 2 questions. Finally, we had 2 questions about additional conditions of approval, which we are amenable to, our client is amenable to. One was the question of monitoring wastewater, and we understand that's the direction that the city policy is going in. We think there are benefits of that to both the property owner and the city, and so we are amenable to that condition of approval. The second one related to a question that Commissioner Hardy had, and I think The question dealt with how do we know what specific areas are used for specific uses, and the breakdown. In the county, you have a somewhat simplified situation, although I'm sure they take issue with that term. But in the county, you can't have a tasting facility and you cannot barrel age wine that you don't make there too, and that's kind of the heart of the winery definition ordinance. They did not wish for people to set up shop and call it Napa Valley, so it's a little more straightforward. In this case, we have existing use of the wine warehouse, and then we have the newly proposed use, which would be the custom crush facility. We are regulated by two metrics. One is the 120,000 gallons per year, and the other one is the translation of that 120,000 gallons to cases of wine, and that's about 50,000. We also are limited by the square footage that is associated with the barrel storage building. This was the question Commissioner Hardy had, and it's my understanding from discussions with Mr. Hardy and with Noah Hausch that as long as we are bottling this wine at this facility, which is absolutely the intention. You remember we called it a one-stop shop. Sorry, Mr. Pott. But it is that, and we don't really intend. The intention is not to do barrel storage there. The intent is for the wine warehouse to continue in its capacity of storing case goods, and then the custom crush would be basically doing everything, receiving the fruit, fermenting, barrel storage, bottling, sending it out. So it's my understanding that with that definition that we are fine with the 120,000 gallons of 50,000 cases, and with that kind of dynamic in the processing. So we are amenable to having the condition state that specifically. And then, of course, if we wanted to have some kind of additional barrel storage there or something over the 120 or 50,000, we fully understand the obligation to come back and modify the use permit. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer. And as I say, we're all here, our team, and we're happy to answer your questions.
David, do you have any questions?
I do have a question. I also would like to state that I did meet representatives of the project, including Donna, yesterday at the site. I'm wondering if the applicant would also be comfortable with a condition associated with retrofitting the existing toilets, which are not low flow, into the toilets and the showers into a low flow situation as part of addressing the water neutrality requirement. It looked like as we toured the site yesterday that about half the toilets and several showers were old style 3-gallon or 3.5-gallon or whatever they were rather than low flush. And it would seem like a very easy way to sort of help to tick off the box with the water neutrality issues. Thanks.
Well, we are obligated to show a water neutral condition, and I think it's obvious that if there are water facilities on site that could stand upgrade, then that would be the logical place to begin. Typically, the challenge for retrofit is that there isn't that much development in town, and so it can be a real challenge just finding someone that needs low flow toilets that somebody didn't get there before you did. I remember at one point somebody retrofitted all the boys' toilets at one of the schools, but not the girls' toilets. I always wondered if the girls' toilets got finally retrofitted. But that makes sense, and I can't imagine why we wouldn't look there first. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that, Nat? Okay. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Coutson? And thank you. I have to say thank you for coming to the site and for those of you who talked with me, because we don't always have that opportunity. I think some of you are probably already familiar with the site, but I know from having been a planning commissioner in the past myself, there's nothing quite like just boots on the ground. So I appreciate your time this week. Any other questions for me?
Questions, John?
I have questions of staff.
Oh, okay. He has a question. I've got a couple questions for you, but go ahead, John.
I have some questions of staff. And this is around the fencing again. It's 20 feet setback in the front, which you're saying is the Lafada side, right? Dowdell side. Okay, so if that's the front, we're talking about a small rectangle for the pond. I understand the need to put the fence around that pond, and I read the approach in the staff report. I remain unconvinced, and this is sort of a process question. Why wasn't the fence approached as a variance? Because that's essentially what it is.
Sure.
So I mean, that would make it completely clean, above board. We wouldn't have to make any interpretations of the code that, to my mind, go beyond what's possible, because fencing is actually listed in the zoning code for industrial areas. So pulling fencing ideas out of a general fencing section, I don't think works. And applying flexibility for church steeples and radio towers to a fence, I have trouble making that connection as well. So it would seem to me that under our code, that since the purpose of a variance is to allow for variation from strict application of the terms of this title, that's perfect for this situation. And given the sensitivity right now around wineries and winery projects, I would think just as terms of process, we would have taken this as a variance to the code rather than trying to essentially explain it away. It would be complete, clear, above board, fits our code 100%.
So that is one perspective the Commission is welcome to take. Staff saw that the other sections of the code that do allow flexibility in the height of fences in residential districts, for example, height of architectural features, as you mentioned, or equipment, was similar enough that they could be applied should the Commission choose to, given that a use permit is a part of the application, and given that the residential fencing standards seem to be relatively atypical and may not, when the code update for that standard was done, it may not have been done in a comprehensive way and really in a thoughtful way. So staff did see this as kind of a less onerous mechanism that is available to the Commission. However, the variance is also an acceptable mechanism for the reasons you stated.
I would also point out that the fence is not something that was proposed by the applicant. The fence is actually a condition of approval related to public health and safety. So they're obligated to do the fence. It's not something that's being proposed, and we're asking for an exception for purposes of the development itself. I would argue it's a condition of approval, not a proposal that would trigger a variance.
Whether it's a condition of approval or not, the variance doesn't say, the wording on the variance, at least the preamble to it, doesn't say anything about conditions of approval or any other thing. It just says terms of title. Also, like I said, it seems to me that since fencing is included in the section that talks about industrial developments, literally, 3-foot fence in the first 20 feet. After that, you can go up to 8 feet. since that's included in the section on industrial, I don't see how we reach to a residential approach and say, well, this applies. I would think if you're talking about industrial zoning, the fencing requirements for the industrial zoning is what applies. And that only allows a 3-foot fence in the first 20 feet. So if we take it as a variance, I think it would make it crystal clear. We've got a problem here. The way to fix it is to address it as a variance. That way we don't have to mention sections of the code that actually have nothing to do with industrial development. And it's neat, it's clean, the process is clear, nobody can object that we did something odd for this particular project. No, we took what was a problem as a variance.
Well, your point is well taken. We deal with this not. It's not unusual to deal with something like this, and sometimes these requirements that are health and safety are requirements that we don't typically have a variance for that. I don't believe this really rises to that level. I don't think this is a variance. I think this is a health and safety requirement specific not to the development that's being proposed, but to that particular appurtenance. If we were talking about a fence around the development, a decorative fence, a landscaping fence, would be a different matter. But I would respectfully disagree that this would not require a variance.
Well, I would find that difficult because the placement of the object under discussion. If the retention basin were out of the first 20 feet, you could put an 8-foot fence around it. So it's the placement, the choice of the design, that causes this interference.
So do you want to make that a condition? Is that what you're asking?
Well, no, I'm saying that approval of this fence should be taken as a variance, literally. It's placed in a location, could have been placed someplace else, I don't know, but it's placed in this location. Yes, it is a requirement. Just like if I put a pool in my front yard, I'd have to have a fence around it. And if it was inside the setback, I would need a variance to do so.
So how would a variance be done now at this point? I'm just curious.
Bobby, that's enough.
Well, we're just
Noah, can you answer that,
So,
please?
yeah, if as stated, staff finds that the use permit does provide a mechanism for the commission to grant the location of the fence. However, there is an alternative perspective, as mentioned by Commissioner Pont, which is a valid one. If the commission sees a variance as the appropriate mechanism, the applicant would be required to file that variance application. Project would have to be continued. Or an alternative method of compliance would be to condition the project that no fencing be located in the setbacks. They would have to redesign the detention basin slightly, likely lose some of the landscape and other amenities from the staff perspective, which add to kind of the visual aesthetic appearance of the design, but they could either shrink the detention basin and make it deeper or push it closer to the building, losing some of the landscaping. Or file the variance and keep the existing location, but a variance application would require a continuance. And variance applications, I believe, are about $5,000.
In my mind, they have two options. Because this is a winery, because it isn't in the industrial tract, because there is fencing requirements set aside in the zoning for industrial tracts, and that's literally what it says. So I would think their two options are go for a variance, or move it out of the first 20 feet.
I'm going to suggest we have a processing challenge right at this point. We've opened a public hearing and then digressed to a question for staff with the public hearing still open. The question that Commissioner Pont has raised could, depending on how it's decided by the Commission, require an additional application before the matter as a whole can be decided. With the public hearing open, I don't think we can reach that question or take any action on it until the public hearing is complete and closed. So I really think we've gotten into a discussion that's better held after the public hearing is closed rather than at this time.
Do you have any questions of the applicant, Mr. Hardy?
No, I do not.
I do. I just wanted to clarify. These conditions say that, I'm confused a little bit, that the volume of wine produced is limited to 127,000? Is that a typo, or is that?
Well, I had a hand in the metrics here, so I'll volunteer some explanation. I asked some questions about at the previous hearing as to what the applicant intended by 120,000 gallons, and the response I thought was pretty clearly that they intended to apply for a use permit that would allow them to produce and bottle 50,000 cases of wine. Sort of the, marvel of how government works. It takes an act of Congress to change how wine is taxed, but the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms had the authority to change the regulations for bottle sizing. So wineries are required to use metric size bottles, but they must report the gallons bottled, not the liters bottled. So we have 9-liter cases, but if you look to the reports that the winery is required to file with the federal government for confirmation of how many cases were bottled, you're in gallons. And there is actually in the Code of Federal Regulations the mandated conversion. There are 2.37753 gallons per case of wine. Not a very convenient number. The fact that I know it by heart is testimony to how many times I filled out a monthly report. But if you take it literally, 50,000 cases reported as bottled to the TTB now, formerly the BATF, is 118,876.5 gallons. So my proposal was that we round that up to 119,000 gallons bottled, which is actually 50,051 cases of wine. And then I also thought that we should be clear in the way in which we define the condition that there is a difference between what you have at the beginning of the winemaking process, which is ordinarily reported as produced to the TTB. I think that's Part 1, Section A, Line 2. We wrote it in the draft condition for clarity's sake. That's wine produced by fermentation. Well, wine is aged. There are losses to evaporation and other processing losses over time. So not having any guidance from the applicant in response to my queries, I looked at about 3% per year over 2 years as a reasonable guess as to the average loss for a winery of this size, and that's where I got 127,000 gallons as the proposed limit on gallons produced by fermentation. So we have one limit at the beginning of the process and another at the end, and they have a rational, if perhaps imperfect relationship. And also inherent in this concept is the idea that if we have limited the volume of wine produced by fermentation, which is generally one of the most intensive activities at a winery, both with respect to water use, wastewater generation, trucking, employees, really the whole process. And we've also regulated the volume at the end of the process, in terms of gallons or cases bottled, then we have metrics that we can use to review compliance if necessary, and we don't really need to be concerned about incidental ins and outs of bulk wine. Because if the wine comes in to be bottled, there's a maximum value there, and if it goes out, it's out. So that's where those numbers came from. They're not cast in concrete from my perspective, but I think they do serve to reflect the applicant's intent to obtain a permit for a 50,000 case winery, and that's why I propose them.
I guess my question was, and thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
If people are going to bring in bulk wine, I mean, that's a possibility too, and that's going to be part of what's counted towards that 120, whichever number you use. If they bring in bulk wine, is it going to be put in barrels and stored there? And if so, I heard you say that's not allowed. It has to be crushed there in order to be fermented and stored
No, that's
there?
at the county.
Okay.
With the county's winery definition ordinance, you have to make the wine there in order to barrel storage, but we don't have that requirement in St. Helena. So this could happen there.
And it's not specifically stated that bulk wine can come in, or I haven't seen it. If that isn't stated, should it be stated as that would be counted as part of this?
Well, it's just all part of the total 120,000 gallons. In fact, I want to say we don't want to change the project description to say 127,000 gallons because we have said consistently from the beginning in our environmental analysis caps it at 120,000 gallons. So we don't want to go down that road if it means
if you if you produce 120,000 gallons by fermentation, you're not going to have 50,000 cases to bottle. So if you don't mind reducing the volume of wine you have to bottle to something less than 50,000, then the numbers certainly could be changed, but it's not a trivial reduction. It's going to be something on the order of a 6-7% reduction.
I think
those numbers are there because I understood very clearly that the applicant wanted to be able to bottle 50,000 cases and that was part of the business plan.
I'd like to discuss that with my client, but I can tell you we do not want to go back and redo an environmental document and start this process all over again based on that difference. So, and that's...
I don't think anyone's proposing that. It's just a question of clarifying what it means to say you're going to produce 50,000 cases of wine, which was treated as equivalent to 120,000 gallons, which it isn't really.
Well, if we accept your metrics, the metrics we used were 2.47 gallons per case. If we accept what you're proposing, then it's fewer than 50,000 cases, somewhat fewer, but if you're suggesting that to get to 50,000 cases, then we have to go to 127,000 gallons, well, then we're inconsistent with our project description, and I'll defer to our CEQA specialist and your planning director, but I don't think we can do that without going back and revising the documents and staff reports and everything else.
So the CEQA analysis is done in terms of gallons, Donna? Or is it done in terms of cases?
Well, both. We were proposing 120,000 gallons per year. If you divide that by 2.47 gallons per case, which is a kind of one standard, then you're okay. And what Commissioner Hardy is suggesting is he doesn't agree with that metric. He thinks a different metric should apply. So then you come up with a different number.
Well, at 120,000 anything, a couple decimal points, that far out can make a difference. So I don't know how exact
Well, 7,000.
you need to be. I mean, he said 120,000 gallons is 50,000, 51 cases,
Wait a
right?
minute, now come on, enough is enough of this.
Wait.
Well, we can have the discussion at the end. I mean, we do need to
Well, I
complete
think
the
that we should
public
wait
hearing.
and discuss it at the end.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but so just to clarify, it doesn't need to be, the wine brought in doesn't need to be specified that would be part of the count. It's okay not to have that. I guess I'm asking staff that.
Yeah, so bulk wine would be a permitted element of the production of this custom crush facility, as would fermentation of and crushing of grapes. So bulk
that
wine is
mentioned?
actually a reduced impact because you wouldn't be crushing or
Right.
getting rid of pumice or any of those things.
I just wondered if it needed to be mentioned.
It's seen as wine production. There's no distinction whether they crush, ferment, and barrel, or just bring in the wine and barrel. Either way, they would be subject to the limitations.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Olford, I have a couple of questions. I'm concerned about the water usage. Are you going to be cleaning the tanks with well water, or are you going to be using city water?
The processed water will come from the well, and then that water will be treated before it's sent to the city's wastewater treatment plant. But our potable water uses, and landscaping also will come from the well. Our potable water uses, such as toilet flush, drinking, coffee making, that sort of thing, will
That
come
comes
from the city supply.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. I have something that I don't understand, and I'm going to ask you maybe the bioretention facility. You've indicated that the wastewater from the production of the wine is going to go into that and then to an 8-inch pipe on the sewer. And you also are indicating that the stormwater runoff will go into that same retention. Do they go in at different times? This is for my own information. I don't understand this commingling of the two things, and that's what I'm asking.
Okay, I'm going to ask our civil to speak to that, or Tom, if you want to.
Good. I'm glad
I
you
always
didn't know
try
for sure either.
I try to not be the engineer.
My name is Tom Faraday. I'm with Valley Architects here in St. Helena. The bioretention pond is only for stormwater. That is water from the roof and the parking lot. All of the processed water from winemaking goes through a rather elaborate treatment process,
Okay.
and then it goes into the city sewer.
All right. Thank you very much.
I'd like to make one more point about the pond.
Go ahead.
It is where it is because there's no other place to put it. We would love to have it 20, 30 feet from the road, but as it is, it's about 17 or 18 feet from the curb, not from the property line, but from the curb. And it's there because we couldn't lose parking. It's abutted by parking on two sides and on streets by the other sides. So there's really no other place to put it. Thank you.
I have one more thing, Ms. Olford. I'm a little concerned about using Mills Lane right now for any construction trucks going in and out, and I would prefer that not happen, and I wonder if that would bother you if I'd ask you to put that in the resolution that you would not use mill lanes with construction. I went over there the other day, and it really raises a lot of dust.
Do you have any thoughts about that, especially Andy? Dowdell is a pretty logical point of entry, and for construction, I should think that Dowdell would actually be the choice.
Well, that's what I'm asking we do. I also will tell you that I was the one that asked for the measurement of the wastewater, the meters. I think the city's been talking about doing that anyway, and the gentleman that was here last week that said we should approve this for you all happened to be on the water committee, and he suggested it. That's where I got the idea. So I think it's a good idea to start with it. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
On that issue, I'm wondering, after it's finished, if trucks will be instructed to use Dowdell, just the trucks that are coming in and out to the facility because of the dust issue. If the dust issue is for construction trucks, it certainly will also be for the trucks involved with the process. I don't know if that's even possible to ask, but it seems to be in keeping with the point that was just brought up.
It's likely an unenforceable condition,
Okay.
given that
Okay.
you don't have control over the folks who choose to drive on public streets as they
I
access
see.
private property.
I mean, you could have some guidance signs or something. You could tell people, please use Dowdell Lane, or yeah.
I'll just point out that
You have to come to the podium.
there's a man-made bottleneck at the intersection of
Mills and
Mills and
29.
Mills and La Fada.
That's right.
There's these big boulders.
Yeah.
Those of you who visited the site, and so they prohibit big trucks from going through there.
Well, and that's what I'm concerned
And
about
so
is the big
it's
trucks.
cars
The pickup
only
truck
now.
is fine, you know.
In the future, perhaps when Ted Hall's hotel is built, Mills will be improved and those boulders will go away, and so on. But for the time being, it's impractical for trucks to go through on
That's
the Mills
great.
Lane.
That's why you were so easy on that one. Thank you.
I think that's a logical barrier, and I think it's also logical that most traffic would use Dowdell. But because Mills Lane is also a public street, I don't think you can condition that vehicles can't use it.
You can't.
So,
You can't. It's against state law.
Yeah.
You can't do that. No.
so
Anyway, it sounds like it's not practical to use it anyway at this point.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Olsford.
are there any other questions for me?
I don't think so.
I would just like to close in asking you, since you're going to be deliberating this question of the fence later, you've been presented with basically three options, and I respectfully understand Mr. Pont's concerns. Your planning director tells you we do have the ability within this use permit to address this issue, and we would really like for you to choose that option and do that because it is a valid option. This does not translate into a requirement for a variance. And also, this is really coming up pretty late in the process here to insist that this is a variance. We don't think it is, and we just request that you allow us that option within the use permit process that your planning director has advised you about. I concur with his assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Close public comment. All right. Would you like to start the discussion, please?
No. Well, all right. I guess I'm still concerned about the noise, and I don't agree with the negative mitigated declaration that it is insignificant. I think is significant, and from discussions I've had with people who know, there's really no way to mitigate that noise because there is no way to put a time constraint on when the trucks can come. They get to come all night long. And even though there is a noise ordinance, the right to farm law supersedes that. So there is going to be noise in 2 to 3 months of the year. It's going to be 24/7, and I think it's significant in the night still air for the neighborhoods that are right across from Mills and, Charter Oak, Allison, Mariposa, and McCorkle Avenue. There are a lot of people that live there. So I just can't. It doesn't make sense to me that the positive impact for the community outweighs the significant impact from the noise that I think is quite possible from this project. And there doesn't seem to be any way to mitigate it. So no one is willing to discuss that. So that's my only. My main reservation about it. I think they've done a really good job in the complying to what's been asked in the rest of it. But
thank you.
I'm
I feel
willing to
strongly.
engage you on that, Bobby.
Okay.
Ms. Monette. What's interesting about the design is where the red arrow is that the additional facilities are actually oriented towards Dowdell Lane, not towards the residential area. And so that would significantly mitigate noise that otherwise would head northwards towards Kid Ranch Road and the other neighborhoods up there.
Well,
so I would say
Fossil-
that this design actually is very respectful from that perspective.
Well, the red arrow is closer to Mills than it is. We're having a discussion. It's closer to Mills than it is to Dowdell, so I'm not sure what you mean.
I just mean that because the entryway and where those trucks are, there's now going to be a new building there, that therefore the noise is oriented towards Dowdell, not towards the neighborhood. So I think that I like this project a lot. With the measurement of the sewage water and retrofitting of the existing non-retrofitted water facilities across the building, I'd love to approve this project.
Mm-hmm. I hear. I appreciate what you said, and I still I'm very very sensitive to that aspect of the impacts, and I'm not sure that what you're saying is correct, but I hear what you're saying. I'll consider that.
Do you have any further comments, David?
For our sake and the applicant's sake, Commissioner Pont, I think you're raising a really interesting point. I think we should rely on staff and approve it as configured with the additional conditions.
The ones that have been written.
Yeah. And also, I also really respect Vice Chair Hardy's concerns. I suggest that we also, I think to me, it's not material for the approval. Wherever that level is set, I think it's sort of a wash from my perspective.
Mr. Hardy, do you have some comments?
Sure. Some general and some particular. I like this project a lot. I think it's a very important opportunity for this community to strengthen its relationship to local wine producers. I think that has a lot of positive potential for St. Helena moving forward. I'm simply too battle-scarred, if you will, by a long history of disputes between applicants and winery owners in Napa County over how to interpret production limits and how to confirm what's actually been produced at a winery, not to be very sensitive to how we approach that here. And so, you know, what I've attempted, again, is a way, I would say, simply to interpret the project description of the applicant in terms that eliminate some ambiguity and establish very clearly, kind of point directly at where one should go to verify, should there be a need or a reason to verify compliance. And that's why I incorporated the references to the report of wine premises operations, which is the current version of what decades ago we knew as the Form 702. And I do think one of the problems, and this has been true for Napa County, although they've now got a very elaborate definition of produced to deal with this. The problem with just saying the use permit is limited to 120,000 gallons is that it doesn't tell you when you're measuring it. Because if you crush, pick a number, 250 tons of grapes, you will have one volume of wine produced in December after the vintage, and you'll have another volume 6 months after that, and another volume a year after that, and yet another volume at the time you bottle, with the numbers, generally speaking, shrinking the entire time. So, again, having asked what the applicant intended and understood understanding, correctly or not, that they want to be able to bottle 50,000 cases from the wine they produced at the winery. I thought the appropriate and respectful thing to do in addressing my concerns was to work from 50,000 cases backwards, which required me to make some assumption on the average loss between production by fermentation and bottling. And if the applicant prefers that we start with 120,000 gallons produced by fermentation, that that doesn't trouble me any. That leads if we assume if you assume 3% losses over 2 years average, you end up with something, I think, on the order of 46 or 47,000 cases bottled. I could run the math, but I just don't see a CEQA problem here. We're using some rational metrics to interpret the project description for purposes of writing the conditions of approval. That's the way I look at it. If the Commission agrees, then it's easy. If there are other ideas or concerns, I'm happy to engage.
Vice Chair Hardy?
Yeah.
Question for you.
Yeah.
It sounds like the swing of this is about 5 or 6%. Is that true? From your calculation?
We're assuming, and again, I should have disclosed earlier, I did meet with the applicant at the site yesterday, and I've had a couple of phone conversations and some email exchanges. One has to make some assumption about the ratio of red wine to white wine, because red wine will typically stay in barrel longer, and you have more losses over time and small cooperage for red wine than for white, and so on. So 3% a year over 2 years. I'm assuming that the total volume produced in any vintage by fermentation is going to be reduced by roughly 6% before it's bottled.
So is your concern that the way that the project is set today means that because that we're assigning it per vintage and it's not currently assigned per vintage? Is that correct? So if there was some
I'm just saying we need to say what we really mean. So if 120,000 gallons means 120,000 gallons bottled, that's one thing. It's, as I say, it's more than 50,000 cases, but regardless, that's one number. But if we're going to regulate, and the reason, perhaps this is what's been missing from my explanation, the reason I'm looking at a limit on the gallons produced by fermentation and the gallons bottled is then, from my perspective, we have no reason to be concerned about the kind of gaming of the use permit that folks have done outside the city of St. Helena, where they interpret the 120,000 gallons to apply to fermentation only, and then truck in another 100,000 gallons so that they're bottling 220,000. So, the county ended up with a very elaborate way of auditing reports in order to keep track of all the bulk in and out. But from my perspective, if you have a limited fermentation and you have a limited bottling, you're fine.
Thank you. I didn't understand that was the point.
That's the point. You have to capture the process at beginning or the end, or you leave the door open, and you don't have a defined way to track it. So the proposed condition is intended both to eliminate any need to engage in debates about what's going on with bulk wine, which will move in both directions. It's inevitable. There'll be wine people produce that doesn't fit their profile that isn't appropriate for them to bottle, that's sold in the bulk market or what have you. There will be a wine that comes in to replace that. There are all kinds of reasons that the clients of this custom crushing winery will be sending wine out and bringing wine in. But if we've got things bracketed at both ends, then no matter what happens in between, there's a limit on what can be bottled, and we've already limited what can be produced by fermentation. And if we're going to do both, then we need to consider how the challenge of establishing an appropriate relationship between the two values, which are meaningless if you say they're the same, because they're not.
May I address the commission? I think the county, we're talking in precise numbers and equivalents, and we have different standards. People have different standards. I know every time I talk to somebody in one of our consulting teams, they use 2.5 gallons per case. I use 2.47. Somebody else uses 2.6. We're trying to apply a very precise standard and measurement to a business that really isn't that precise. The county recognized this some years back, and they had actually a method where they allowed a 30% deviation that was averaged over a period of 3 years. For instance, if you had 120,000 gallons was your maximum production, you could go over that 120,000 gallons as long as you did not, that was averaged out at 120 over any 3-year period. And that was kind of a concession to the fact that we're not dealing in precise, we're dealing in a liquid product that is a fruit processing plant. And as we all know, when we deal in fruit, you don't necessarily get the same pounds or the same gallons or it's a difficult process to get very precise with. I think when you have a facility this size, we certainly have no intention of gaming the process over a difference such as is being discussed here. But we've got to use something as a maximum production level. We used 120,000 gallons, and then, in Sonoma County, they don't use gallons. They use cases. In Napa County, we use gallons, not cases. So we want to have a consistent number that all of our technical reports have dealt with, our water, our wastewater, our traffic, our water use. So I'm suggesting that this should be 120,000 gallons, and however many cases that is may vary in a number of ways, including the thickness of a bottle that you have 1 year versus another year. But I don't think that's something that we can resolve here tonight. We have this project before you. We're trying to get a use permit with a consistent project description, and so we're just suggesting that number should be 120,000 gallons, and however you want to translate it into cases, maybe we go fewer cases, maybe we don't say 50,000 cases, instead we say 48 or whatever it was, but that is the operative number. That's what we were asked for. That's what we presented. That's how it's done in the county, and hopefully we can move this along tonight and not get too hung up on that.
Staff would just like to jump in. I had some discussions with Commissioner Hardy, and staff very much appreciates both the limitation or allowance on the input side and the limitation on the allowance on the output side, because it gets to a lot of the issues that were discussed by Commissioner Hardy, and also that were discussed by Ms. Oldford, because as we've seen in the attempts by St. Helena, the attempts by Napa County to regulate this industry, it is a challenging effort because every year is different with regards to production levels because it's an agricultural product. Having a limitation or allowance on both ends, I think, is a very clean metric, and it's a way that we can move forward as we look at wineries in general. And if the 120,000 gallon doesn't quite get to the 50,000 case, there are opportunities for them to bring in additional wine to amend it, to blend it, those types of things. Staff appreciates both the input and the output limitation. And also, while the commission likely could find 127,000 gallons substantial conformance, staff hasn't thought about that much. We do appreciate, or I do appreciate, the concern that Ms. Olford has of keeping all of the analysis consistent with the conditions that are in the project. And frankly, I don't think the applicant is that worried about the differences that are being discussed.
Well, if we use the same framework in the proposed conditions and limit wine produced by fermentation to 120,000 gallons and wine bottled to 119,000 gallons, then we have things bracketed at both ends, and what that means is that in order to bottle 50,000 cases, the applicant will, and really the applicant's clients, in order for the total volume of the business to reach 50,000 cases, some wine will have to be imported in bulk. Not a lot. I don't know that that's any more a part of the project description than the approach I've taken, but it may be arguably it's more consistent with it. I'm fine. I really have only tried my best to propose a framework that required numbers to be generated. I'd be fine with that because, as I say, the bulk wine, the differentials involved are not big enough from my perspective to be a concern.
So would these be, I just have a question, would any of this affect how TTB would tax, and would that affect the taxes that we get as a city? I mean, with this, because you mentioned that TTB.
We don't get any of the excise tax collected by the federal government or the state.
So this wouldn't affect our tax.
No. And the tax is collected only when the wine, when it leaves bonded premises, and it can leave this winery in bond, or it can leave tax paid. The tax can be paid here, it can be paid somewhere else. That's a whole arcane thing in and of itself. The reason there is a form on which all of these values are reported is because the bond that people refer to when they talk about a bonded winery or a bonded warehouse has to be maintained at a level adequate to cover the tax liability for the total volume of wine stored in bond. And that's why every winery has to keep track of what it produces by fermentation, what it has in inventory, in bulk and in bottle at any moment, and what volume is moved from bulk inventory into bottle. So they have a very refined record-keeping and reporting process that, if you understand how to use it and if you define the terms in a way that is consistent with it, enables local jurisdictions like ourselves to confirm compliance. And that, again, was what I was trying to capture. But I'd be just fine with going to 120,000 gallons produced by fermentation and leaving the bottled amount at 119,000, because I have no issue with having this use permit enable the winery to function as a 50,000 case facility.
So let's do that.
Thank you. It's my turn. I like the project a lot. I think it's something that St. Helena needs. We're concerned about traffic. I think it's going to stop a lot of traffic. I'm going from here to Napa. I mean, I've picked grapes last 5 years and watched them haul them all down to Napa in the pickup trucks. So I think that it's probably going to help the traffic situation a little bit. I think that it's nice to have the crush here in Napa of our own grapes. I'm sure that they'll probably bring in some from someplace else, but I think it's. I also think that Mr. Coombs' family has done wonders with wine in the valley, and I appreciate their wine. So I'm all in favor of the project.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I had some questions, but I do have a.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't have a real problem with this project. When I joined the commission, I made it really, really clear that one of the things that was really important to me was process. Making sure that what gets done is done according to the adopted code. And it seems to me that the only way to make sure this is done according to the adopted code, not talking about a section that talks about fences in rear or side yards, which is one of the ones quoted in the staff report, or about radio towers and church cupolas. Frankly, that we talk about fencing in the industrial district. I'm just trying to make sure that our process is as clean, as complete, and as accurate as possible. And as far as my reading goes, I respectfully disagree that as there is in the industrial zoning code a whole section on fences and fencing, that we need to comply with that, and this should be taken as a variance. That's my only concern with this project, is process. Otherwise, if this was 20 feet back, I would have said let's put it on consent. But as it is not, I know, Donna, that it can't be because it's a public hearing, okay? But it should be taken as variance.
Do I hear a motion?
I'd like to move to approve the project as stated, with the additional condition of monitoring the sewage water, with the condition that construction trucks use Dowdell and Lafada, and with the retrofit of existing plumbing fixtures in the remainder of the building. Did I miss
Second.
anything?
Roll call.
Who seconded?
I did.
Oh, you did. You were asking.
Commissioner Knudsen?
I'm sorry, I might have made a mistake. Lester, does that include your output piece as well?
I didn't hear it.
I need to add that as well. Can I withdraw my...
You can amend.
I don't know how to do it, yeah.
You can amend the motion.
Amend the motion to include Lester Hardy's, Vice Chair Hardy's output at 50,000? Or no, 119?
My proposal was that the volume of wine produced by fermentation is limited to a maximum of 120,000 gallons, and the volume of wine bottled at the winery is limited to 119,000 gallons.
So
The rest of the language in this second paragraph of draft conditions would be the same.
So with that amendment,
And please remember to include the CEQA determination first in the amendment prior to any decision.
You got to prove the negative deck.
okay, so how do I say that, Planning Director House?
I would say the motion would be to adopt the mitigated negative declaration,
That's correct.
the use permit conditions as amended, and the design review.
It's only one amendment.
What he said.
Well, with those four amendments.
Yes.
I know that Mr. Brown isn't here, but so moved.
Yes.
Second. Roll call.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Chair Kistner,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
No.
Commissioner Pont,
No.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a 10-minute break.
Hello? No,
I think we're good.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, Chair Kistner. The Holt Johnson remodel project involves, as you stated, a request to demolish an existing approximately 1,400 square foot single-family residence constructed around the year 1960 and replace it with a new single-family residence. The new residence would be one story as well, approximately 18 feet in height and 1,700 square feet. As proposed, it would exhibit a front and rear setback of 20 feet and 5-foot setbacks consistent with what currently exists and in accordance with the small lot standards. The proposed residence would feature quality materials and design which is consistent with the residential styles exhibited throughout St. Helena. As required per existing CC&Rs in the neighborhood, the residence would be limited to 1 story in height, which translates to a slight increase of 2 feet over what currently exists. The proportions and siding of the new construction generally retain the siding and proportions of the existing home and concentrate the additional square footage at the rear. The project meets applicable general plan and zoning criteria and would exhibit a floor area ratio of 2.48, which is within the allowed 3.40 allowed by the code. Given the size and irregular shape of the lot, the applicant is requesting to employ the small lot standards to allow for a more efficient use of the lot and continue the typical siding exhibited by the existing residents and surrounding lots in the neighborhood. Employment of the small lot standards requires that a project meet specific development standards and also meet the findings needed to be issued a use permit. As detailed in the staff report, the project is able to meet the small lot standards and the findings needed to issue the use permit. Last, because the project exhibits appropriate scale and architectural style that is differential to the existing setting and would feature design elements and materials appropriate for the residential use, it is found to meet all required design review findings. The Planning and Community Improvement Department recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution finding that the project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA pursuant to Section 15301 and 15303 and accept the required findings and approve the requested demolition permit, use permit, and design review for the Holt Johnson residence. I would like to make note that there seems to be an error in the resolution. Condition number 30 appears to be an actual comment opposed to a condition. So page 473, condition 30, that condition we would like amended to state that the project is required to meet the requirements of the water demand analysis that was provided by the applicant. Page 473, number 30. Yeah, we would like to amend or revise that condition to state that the project is required to meet the water demand analysis that was provided by the applicant. And the applicant and their team is here if you have any questions of them.
Are there any questions of staff? Applicant like to speak?
Am I supposed to? Hi, I'm Mila Holt. That's my husband, Tyler. And we tried really hard to design a house that would fit into the neighborhood and that would meet the CCRs of the neighborhood. So we were very careful with height. We know that that's been an issue in the neighborhood and that neighbors are very sensitive to that. So the only issue is with the side setbacks, which are very standard throughout this neighborhood. If you look at the exhibit that we attached to our application, you can see that pretty much every house has 5-foot setbacks, and our lot is quite a bit smaller than any of the other lots on the cul-de-sac, and it's pie-shaped. So the problem is that if we didn't have the 5-foot setbacks, the house, which is already very small, it starts out as 1,400 square feet, but it has an illegal garage conversion. So we need to transfer some of that land back, that area back into a carport. So if we don't keep the 5-foot setbacks, the house turns into a super narrow and strange house, and we have no backyard. So we did a lot of neighborhood outreach. We went to 33 houses and really got pretty much universal support for the project. We showed plans, and all of our immediate neighbors and the neighbor in back were very supportive. We got letters of support, and people generally felt that we went about it the right way. So they feel that they've bought into it, and people have been asking me to let them know how this goes tonight. So I'm hoping it goes well. That's all I can think of, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Anyone have any questions of the applicant?
No questions?
Is there any other public comment? John, would you like to open the discussion?
I like the design. I think you've done a fine job with it.
Thank you.
John
Lale.
I particularly commend your outreach efforts to the community to get their buy-ins. And I also appreciate your trying to maintain conformance with the CCRs. I don't know whether usually a city doesn't worry about applying those. That's the neighbor's problem, but you've voluntarily tried to comply with those to a rather large degree. I think this is a fine project. I just think we should move forward with it.
Thank you.
I like it a lot as well. I want to disclose that I did visit the property yesterday and met with with your consultant on the project. It's fantastic, and unfortunately that existing home is seriously out of compliance, and I appreciate the fact that you didn't try and save it, but are instead pulling it down because I think it might be actually unsafe from a city perspective, and I am happy that staff is flexible in thinking about those types of projects where there are existing unsafe and illegally converted buildings. And so I would like to also commend the effort to reach out to the neighbors, because that's what really makes our town special, is that you've got buy-in from people all around you. So good for you.
I have a question for Aaron. Aaron, it appears, and I'm looking at sheet A1-0.1, we've got a small corner of the deck, I think that is, within the 5-yard setback. How does that work in terms of the zoning development standards?
Decks and uncovered architectural features can extend into the setback, I believe, up to 3 feet off the top of my head. Anything that's not over 18 inches in height can extend into the setback.
Not considered part of the dwelling, correct?
I'm sorry?
Thank you.
Not considered part of the dwelling.
That's correct.
I have another question, which is, does the site plan as proposed leave a space that would be adequate for a second dwelling unit or not?
Yes.
And how would we know?
I believe in looking at it, it does. An accessory dwelling unit can go up to 5 feet off the rear and side yard property lines. The limiting factor there would be floor area ratio, so they would be handicapped and putting in an ADU based on the FAR. So whatever square footage they have left under would be a limitation.
Okay.
They don't have much left after I figured that one today.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward with respect to that. I like this proposal, and I don't have any concerns about it. But I do think that as we move forward into our larger projects with looking at the zoning ordinance and design review standards and other things, that we should be concerned about having rules in place that could, in effect, allow development that precludes second dwelling units. Because I think the policy that's been implemented by the state legislature in requiring that we make allowance for second dwelling units is an important one. And hopefully soon, I think, we should be talking about and looking at ways to make sure that we don't approve projects that eliminate that possibility where we shouldn't or don't need to. But I have no issues here. It's just a way for me to flag that concern for my fellow commissioners and staff moving forward.
I just the 5-foot setback. It's 5 feet now, and it's not like it's changing. So I didn't have any trouble with that. Plus what you said, and you have written the template for neighborhood input, and I was whoa. Also, you kept it to one story, but the documentation was was stellar, and it was such a delight. And I know it was a lot of work, but it feels really.
I enjoyed it.
Good, yeah. It feels good to be. I just support this project, so 110%. Good.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing that.
I like your project a lot, and I could probably say the same thing that Commissioner Pont said over here, but I won't repeat it. So I'm going to ask, does anyone have a motion to make?
Move staff recommendation.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
And I move that the staff give this as an example of what people might do.
It's helpful when you have a professional planner and architect on your team. I just would like to remind or reintroduce the commission to our planning intern, Joseph Brokoff. He's here presenting his first use permit. So just reminder for the commission that it is, I think, his second presentation here in town. So
I heard him make one the other night, I think. I did. He made one the other night, I believe. Did you not? Yeah. Okay. Request by Ibrahim Agirman. Am I saying that name correctly? Thank you. For use permit approval in order to sell items classified as home furnishings at 1226 Main Street in the Central Business District. May I have a staff report?
Thank you, Chairperson Kistner. I'm just going to weave in a little brief background here. The applicant, Ibrahim, Agirman, has been the owner and operator of Ottoman Arts, which is located in the Central Business District for the last 7 years. His current location, which is at 1228 Main Street, has approximately 1,100 square feet of retail space. And according to Mr. Agirman, this space has been somewhat limiting for him to market and display his products, in particular his handmade oriental rugs, lamps, and ceramics. So he's been looking for the opportunity to expand that footprint, and recently the space directly adjacent to Ottoman Arts, which is at 1226 Main Street, that's where Mirabelle used to be, opened up, and so Mr. Agirman is asking for approval for a use permit to sell home furnishing items that are listed in the St. Helena Municipal Code as china, glassware, and metalware for kitchen and table use, bedding and linen, brooms, brushes, lamps and shades, mirrors and pictures, carpets and rugs, and window coverings. The applicant has been operating his store at 1228 Main Street under the same conditions, and this request is essentially for a smaller expansion of an already conforming use. His hours of operation would be from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, and there would be one full-time employee. Staff finds that the use permit is consistent with the goals, policies, and implementation measures found in the general plan, and that the home furnishing products sold at Ottoman Arts are both local serving and visitor serving in nature. Items related to zoning, such as signage, Mr. Agirman has stated he has no plans to alter or expand the existing signage envelope. Parking standards, this is in the parking impact overlay district, and according to the municipal code, the basic parking requirement for commercial buildings in the parking impact overlay district shall be at least one space for each 1,200 square feet of ground floor area. And I believe the ground floor area at 1226 is approximately 980 square feet. And the lease agreement does include one off-street parking space located at the rear of the building. In addition, there will be no physical expansion or modifications to the footprint or structure of either existing spaces at 1226 or 1228 Main Street. Therefore, staff recommends that the Planning Commission determine that the project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA pursuant to Section 15301, in particular Class 1, which exempts the operation, leasing, or minor altercation of existing facilities, and accept the required findings and approve a use permit for Ibrahim Agirman to sell home furnishing items as described in Municipal Code Section 17.48.030 at 1226 Main Street in the Central Business District.
Thank you. Good
evening, Commissioner Kistner, Planning Commission, and members of the city staff. Thank you all for being here. My name is Jeff Feeney. I'm the real estate broker for Ibrahim Agirman, and I've had the pleasure of working with Ibrahim for about 7 or 8 years, starting at his prior store, moving him up to this current store, and now looking forward to an expansion next door. Ibrahim has been in this location for several years and has been looking for the opportunity to find a way to expand his footprint because this store is smaller than the one he was previously in. This opportunity that came available next door is the perfect situation for him and for our town. He has incredible merchandise, things you won't find anywhere else, and it adds some culture to our downtown, which is something that I think when people come here and people who live here, when you drive down the street at night, I would argue to say it's the most beautiful window in town. So I appreciate your support for Ibrahim, for his business, his expansion, his continued support and investment in this town for he and his family. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Anyone have any questions of the applicant? Is there any other public comment? Public comment is closed.
Thank you.
Bobby, would you like to start?
First of all, I want to say this is my kind of plan. I really could get this one easily. So thank you for that. And I think it's a great idea. I can't wait to see what's in the store. And I'm just, I think it's wonderful, and I support it entirely.
Mr. Hardy.
Honestly, I'm not sure why this wasn't on consent. I'm ready to move approval anytime.
John?
No questions.
David?
Absolutely. I do have a question. Why is the rear of the building pictured in this pictured?
They're showing the parking, I think.
Yeah, that's to show the parking space that's available.
Sort of a neglected corner of our fair city, isn't it?
I love that picture, though. I think that's one of the best pictures ever. It's got character, and it shows a side of St. Along with the plans, it shows a side of St. Helena I can identify with.
Yeah,
That's the side we want to keep hidden.
Where in the world is Waldo? This looks, I wish the applicant good luck in his business ventures.
And so do I. May I have a motion, please?
Go ahead, David.
Move approval.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Knudsen,
Yes.
Commissioner Pont,
Yes.
Chair Kistner.
Yes. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
And I'm going to leave this one up to you, Noah.
Thank you, Chair. The item before the Commission is the City of St. Helena Design Guidelines Work Plan. Ms. Camaro is going to bring up the television. And I have an old school presentation scheduled, just given my my inability to get it to Zinnia before the meeting. So there are handouts in the back for the public, but I put together just a very brief handout-driven presentation, basically summarizing my presentation, and here we go. So the preparation of design guidelines is an adopted city goal since at least the adoption of the 1993 general plan, the 2015 housing element, and the pending 2035 general plan direct the city to draft and adopt design guidelines. They also provide certain goals and objectives to be addressed under these design guidelines. You'll recall in August, at a joint meeting with the City Council, the Planning Commission, as well as the Council, provided direction to staff to implement the policy direction to create design guidelines. Presently, as you're well aware, building and site design in St. Helena is informed by the zoning code development standards of each district. I apologize. It is not. There are handouts on the dais. So it's primarily informed by the zoning code development standards for each district, the 17 design criteria required for design review approval, and any general plan policies that are found to be applicable to the project. These can be very broad and lack the detail and guidance needed to actually direct designers to achieve an ideal design from the Planning Commission and the city's perspective. The current zoning criteria may not account for contemporary design challenges, some of the historic architectural elements, infill development, reconstruction of existing housing stocks, those types of things that we see on a regular basis here at the commission level, and may provide limited utility in advancing the vision and goals of the general plan, the intent of the commission for the future of architectural design in the built environment here in St. Helena. I know, unfortunately, that it does not zoom out anymore, but I can keep it straight. But essentially, we will be using the adopted policies to direct the creation of design guidelines, and you'll see that the goals in the design, the work plan are limited based on that existing adopted policy direction. So it's important to make a distinction while the 2035 general plan update has a lot of design-specific elements. It's important to understand that because that is not adopted policy, that cannot guide this process. So staff is seeing this as a limited exercise in creating a foundational design guideline palette that then could be amended and added to as the city sees fit. But also we do feel it's important to get the process going, given some of the challenges we've seen with approving projects by right and some of the design criteria that may not be that explicit, but the expectations are there. Secret compliance is going to be a big element in also limiting how broad the scope of this policy can be, given that there's essentially no additional budget provided for the city to prepare these currently. So what are design guidelines? They're a set of standards used by developers, property owners, architects, designers, and public agencies to inform design in a way that's responsive to the community's vision and which perpetuates a valued sense of place. They guide the design of new construction, alterations, additions, and site modifications. They articulate the community's vision for the city, and they serve as a valuable tool for perpetuating the established character of neighborhoods and the city in general. You'll see, and I'm not going to read these, but these are the goals currently identified in the work plan. For anyone looking at home, that is available online. There are slides and handouts in the back. But essentially, the goals are pulled straight from the zoning code design goals, the design review goals, in addition to taking a little bit of influence from the adopted housing element. However, staff is looking for some direction on these goals from the commission, given that you all have been involved in some of these issues longer than I have. So just to briefly go over the process, it's essentially seen as being 4 steps. So the first would be review and preparation. Staff would be doing a lot of information gathering, preparation of documents, handouts, informational kind of exhibits. while I said that the preparation design guidelines has been directed since at least 1993, there are some documents from the 80s and 70s even that provide some design kind of direction and goals. Some of them are still applicable to contemporary standards, and so staff will kind of put together all of those things into informational packets and handouts. And then the goal would be to have the visioning process, step 2, which is community engagement. So workshops, meetings with individual groups, a survey to gain input. We would also seek input from design professionals. So I've already been discussing this topic with some of the architects, local architectural firms, other folks that are known in the city to have interest in design, the Historic Society, those types of things. And then obviously we'll have open house meetings to just get general public input. We've been kind of thinking about how to engage the broadest spectrum possible for getting input. Then we would take all that, refine that direction into a draft of the design guidelines. So that's the refinement process. We'd put together an actual draft that would then be reviewed by some of these folks, these same individuals. We would then put that out to design professionals to see their opinion as to how well we articulated the direction we received. Also, just because they do this for a living, they will have a lot of good insights as to how contemporary architectural expectations can translate into some of the things that are in the design guidelines. Obviously, this then creates an opportunity for a review committee to be created if it's felt that that's necessary by the commission or the council to kind of formalize that review body. But again, I think it's important to start with a foundational element of both community outreach and engagement, as well as a draft for people to start to look at it and really identify how the input that staff receives is articulated. One example that we've been talking about in the department is, people always say, I love the small town charm of St. Helena, or I love the small town character. Well, we're going to be trying to pull out what that really means. Do you mean tree-lined streets, front porches? How does that feeling translate into design, both of restoration or renovation of existing structures, reconstruction of structures such as we just saw in the last design review, or new development. And then finalize that. And then the last step would be to finalize those design guidelines into a final draft, bring that before the Planning Commission. We'd identify that probably 2 meetings at a minimum with the Planning Commission before the recommendations taken on to the City Council. So that's kind of the nutshell of what's in the design guideline work plan. I do apologize for the limited ability to read the presentation here, but it is recommended by the Planning and Community Improvement Department that the Planning Commission review the provided work plan and provide specific comments on the proposed approach, make suggestions on where the Commission feel it may be approved, and ultimately vote to direct staff to initiate this process. That ends my presentation. The work plan itself is included in your packet. There's some sections that are highlighted where staff is seeking specific commission input, and it seems like there may be a local design professional here in the room who may want to comment.
Public comment? That's you.
Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Joshua Park. I just want to say, be careful. I think that you're in relatively dangerous territory here. There's been a lot of issues with the Planning Commission in the past, and I think that the perspective from the design community and staff is that vagueness is what we're trying to address. As a design professional, the expectation is to have rules and guidelines to drive your creative process, but that doesn't mean dictation. And homogenized architecture by neighborhood could quickly become theme-based, which pushes it towards I know it's a dirty word and people use it for Yountville all the time, Disneyland-esque architectural fabric. It segregates people by their own personal bubble of aesthetic preference and sometimes political, etc. I think a diverse community is a rich community, and there's no richness in monotony.
Go to Thousand Oaks.
Pardon?
Go to Thousand Oaks.
I don't get the reference, I'm sorry.
Well, Thousand Oaks is all tan stucco and tile roofs. Every single house in Thousand Oaks.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The charm of St. Helena, I think, falls on the diversified
Maybe it's gonna
nature
burn
of
up
its
tonight.
architecture. The value of the neighborhoods. Look at the neighborhoods that are, I don't want to make this about money, but the neighborhoods that are the most sought after generally have the most diverse architectural fabric. The planned communities, developed spec communities generally hold lesser value, and I think that's a big part of it. And aesthetic policy based on location perpetuates segregation, and it's not, I don't think it's in the best interest of the town. The design guidelines, I think, need to leave room for creative interpretation. That means general guidelines, not dictations. If I were to ask each one of you to draw a house right now, each one of you would have your own vision. If I said draw a house that's 17 feet tall and 30 feet wide and has a gabled roof, you might have select different pitches, but by and large they're all the same. This needs to be a carefully thought out process, and I think that, has there been any public comment on this at all up to this point?
This is the first kind of kickoff of this process. So there has been a significant amount of public input as a part of the policy document saying we need these, but there has not been any specific to the guidelines themselves.
And as far as the conversation about what the existing issues are that we need to address, where's that information coming from?
I would imagine that it's from my perspective, and you all each probably have your own, a combination of allowing multifamily development to be a by right land use in certain zoning districts, committing to the creation of design guidelines because that was made by right, and our code, the policy language actually says we would create the design guidelines prior to making that use by right, but we did it the opposite for a variety of factors. So some of this is playing catch up. In addition, it is also would have been ideal to have the general plan adopted first to rely on some of that policy direction. However, we don't have that luxury, and staff did feel like this is a time when we have the opportunity to try to get some of this done, lean on some of the expertise we have in the department currently with consultants. One example is one of our consultants.
You do have a planned housing element.
We do have, exactly right. We do have an adopted housing element that has very specific direction on these guidelines. Not to the level that you're concerned of, but just the need for them and the scope that they should address.
Okay.
What's your role? Are you just speaking tonight, or are you someone we can contact if we want to talk to you?
No, I think you should put him on this committee. That would put him on 2, I think, now. I think he's in another committee that meets tomorrow night.
Well, I mean, could I call you, or is that your role, or it's what?
I don't have any defined role. I'm just speaking as a concerned citizen.
Oh, okay.
I think that I've had many conversations about this design review process with clients, other citizens, and by and large, for years, it's a contentious issue that I think begets a great deal of pandering by
Absolutely.
members of the town, and
are you a designer?
consequently, yes.
Oh, you are?
Consequently,
Okay.
it creates a lot of theater for the Planning Commission. And, you're already risking forming a homogenized fabric in town based on people's presumptions of what planning commissioners may or may not like based on what they voted on in the past.
Well, historical areas kind of promote that, too.
I'm talking, true, but I'm talking well beyond that. And the design guidelines that are there now in code, they talk about embracing a fabric, and they don't get into minutia and specifics, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think it's a bad thing when you have commissioners who vote based on emotion or political leanings or this isn't the appropriate context for it. You have people pouring their lives and a great deal of money into this, and it's for lack of a better term, a crapshoot. So I don't need to get too deep into it, but I think
Well,
that
get his
there's a
name,
lot to
Noah, and
talk
put him
about.
on your first committee here.
So thank you for the time.
Thank you for coming.
And so one element, I just would like to amend my presentation. One of the things that we've talked about in the work plan is after we get input from the commission, we'll put together an agenda. This is what that will look like. However, this obviously is not the accurate one given that it has September of 2017 of when we started. But this is the ballpark time frame that we're looking at, and I will identify that currently, and then you'll see there's some of the deliverables out to the side, and then the dates as to when those will be provided. This is just a draft, as I mentioned. The creation of design guidelines is one of the council's adopted goals. So it's worth noting also to supplement the information I provided to Mr. Park.
That question, if you please. Noah, aren't we somewhat under the gun to do these anyway? Because our adopted housing element says we will do these, and we haven't done these?
The 1993 general plan said that we would do them. And we would
That is my perspective, yes.
I'm more worried about the housing element because that's the one that really you have to discuss with the state on whether or not you're doing what you said you'd do.
That is my perspective, and you may have seen if you were watching the goal setting, staff had to kind of assert the importance of this because of some of those previous commitments that we hadn't pushed for.
I'm going to go right to the goals. I see you highlighted on page 530 other goals assigned by the Planning Commission. I know the particular multifamily residential related policies of the housing element are referenced elsewhere in the document, but I don't see a goal in this short list of goals that reflects that, and that's something I think is very important. And in particular, I think there's a kind of inherent conflict between design review and affordable, because there's simply no question, and we see it in every meeting packet that we get, that the design review process adds cost to the process of ultimately getting a building permit and building a residential project, whether it's a single-family residence or multifamily. So I think we have a particular challenge that we need to be mindful of in finding a way to define design review standards that implement the policy that, in an effort to simplify the path to multifamily housing, provided for multifamily housing as a permitted use, at least in some circumstances. But we still have to make that process, work in a way that doesn't simply substitute the cost of design review for the cost of a use permit application. I'm not sure where that's going to take us, but I'd like to see some goal enumerated that would be along the lines of making design review for affordable housing affordable. And carrying that over in some rational way to for market multifamily housing as well, since even though that doesn't fit the federal subsidy related definitions of affordable, it's still a very important component or part of having a balanced supply of housing. The other goal that comes to my mind is personal predilection. I'm not sure that it really belongs in design review guidelines, but I'm going to articulate the concern anyway. I think it's really important to look for opportunities to keep or even improve what I would call, the walkability or a pedestrian-friendly character of the community. And in fact, as someone who walks a lot, I have to say St. Helena is really very inconsistent in that regard. There are parts of town that are easy to walk and other parts that are not. That's a difficult thing to address well on a parcel-by-parcel basis. Nevertheless, I'd certainly like to see that as something we have in mind as we go through this process. There may be opportunities.
Lester, aside from walking, biking is also a use that is also, depending on your neighborhood, sort of inconsistently supported. And that's also something that we should absolutely.
And then on community workshop meetings and, just looking for input of tracking the same theme, I think we really should have participation from the groups that are engaged in finding opportunities for and developing affordable housing, or otherwise engaged with the part of our population that lives in our affordable housing. Because amongst other things, I think we need to understand what the perspective of the affordable housing residents and managers and developers is before we approach or at least reach any conclusions about how to write those guidelines.
I also am concerned, apropos of what you're saying, that we don't completely get rid of CEQA standards in this process, and that we are able to do what you're talking about within the civilized guidelines of what requirements there are for non-affordable housing. I just don't like the idea of building substandard housing for people who need affordable housing. I would like to see, I would like to see the same standards apply to whatever affordable housing it gets built as applied to any housing that gets built, because I think it's based on civility and optimum living conditions, space, and so forth.
That's a requirement now.
Yeah.
I think that's a requirement now.
Yeah, so maybe I could jump in. So the intent of design guidelines is not to. It's actually it doesn't. It's they're implemented when your project is determined to go through design review. So it's not a amendment to the policy decision of do you go through design review or do you have a CEQA analysis. It's once you're in that discretionary process, here's some guidelines based on whatever type of project you have to help you meet the intent of the city to maintain the historic fabric of a community, to ensure your addition meets the requirements of the Secretary of the Interior standards, those types of things.
So what you're saying is after the CEQA document.
I would say it's another layer. So you have CEQA, you have the general plan, you have the zoning code, and you have the design guidelines. All policy layers that help guide the design process, the development process, right, to what the city ultimately wants.
I would kind of hope...
Exactly, but...
Project CEQA exempt?
No.
Yeah. Well, they have waivers
if your
for
project
CEQA.
is CEQA.
Many of the things that we take through design review.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would
Except we
hope
can't look
that at the end of this process, we would come up with some guidelines, some guidance, that would make some of these projects easier. For example, the first one we looked at tonight, changing the roof, changing the siding, changing the landscaping. In my mind, ideally, that would be something we wouldn't even see unless somebody here had an objection to it. As long as that person or that project followed the design guidelines and staff administratively reviewed it, fine. I mean, if it would be possible that if there was some other reason we wanted to look at it as a group, we could. But if it would, on Lester's point, making the process simpler, if it wouldn't have to come before this body each and every time for every project, if that person who was doing their first project tonight had come in for an individual building permit to do a roof and then waited, and then came in with an individual building permit to do the windows, had them done, and then waited, and redid his landscaping without telling anybody because he doesn't have to have a use permit to redo his landscaping, and then came in and said, well, I want a building permit to change my siding. I don't think we'd even see it as design review. So that kind of project ideally would be handled at the staff level, and just we wouldn't see much of it. A few notices, and both you and you, David, brought this up, is the intersection of design guidelines with other things that impact the quality of life. Both you gentlemen mentioned transportation, non-motorized transportation. There's other things that are controlled by other parts of the general plan that could affect, what the community is, how the community functions, what these design guidelines should change. I don't know if we can get to those at this point, given that we're trying to stay within the envelope of the existing general plan. But one of the things we might be able to do as we proceed along this process is we have a document we adopt that meets the limited things we can do under the 93 general plan. But we also considered, if you will, an on-deck circle. Elements that the community discussed, that the professionals brought forward to us, that we like and the city council likes, but because of our restrictions under the 93 general plan, we can't currently include. But I'd certainly not like to have them disappear. I would like to have, if you will, an on-deck circle to the process. So when we do get the new general plan, we can add these to the design guidelines in a fairly rapid manner.
How much in the new general plan would really be affected by this, though?
Well, I would say it would be the other way. So,
changes to it.
So the new general plan provides a significant amount of direction on these design guidelines, or just design in the city in general. You'll recall as you're going through the process, some of the elements was essentially trying to get to a form-based code. So, it is a sea change for land use policy for St. Helena if we were to go all the way to a form-based code. And this general plan intentionally moves that meter significantly farther along.
A couple other things. One, particularly on the goals, I agree with your goal, Lester. There should be something in there that talks specifically about low-income housing. But I also agree it should include elements of all housing in that goal. But under the goals, I would like to see a goal that we are going to approve and adopt and recommend a set of guidelines that are easy to understand and apply. If these are too difficult or too voluminous or too odd, we might find ourselves back to where we started from, having to look at every project over and over again at this level to see if they meet the design guidelines, instead of being able to say, okay, architect, engineer, designer, here are our guidelines. They're easy to understand. They're easy to understand for you. They're easy to understand for the public. I would like that to be a goal. Not that we can necessarily reach it, but I'd sure like to try. On your inputs, I would certainly encourage you to widen your net perhaps a little bit, that we want to look at county-wide agencies as well that are interested in these kinds of things. Napa County Landmarks, perhaps the Farm Bureau or the vintners would want to put their oar in the water. Some of these county-wide agencies that think about these things and deal with them might be helpful to add. Last thing I think I have that I would like to consider is when you go out and do the outreach meetings, particularly when we reach the stage where we have where you reach the refinement stage, we've got something to present to people. Here, this is where we're going with it. What do you think? I would appreciate considering some of those outreach meetings at that stage being done at the zonal level. As I imagine, at the end of the day, we're going to cut the city up into pieces. You know, this piece seems to be a coherent design grouping. This piece appears to be a coherent design grouping. I would like to see part of the outreach specifically targeted at that area. So we may have to have, I don't know, however many meetings that'll be. For example, I would think that the central business district would be a fixed area, although that's controlled a lot by the historical. Maybe the Cronulla area would be, maybe Sylvaner would be. But I'd like to see outreach specifically targeted at those areas.
I concur on that, although with maybe internally conflicting thoughts in mind. I see that we have, and I think it's from the housing element, policy that calls for us to consider adopting neighborhood-specific guidelines. I see that as terribly problematic, in part just because of the effort required to create specific templates, if you will, for particular neighborhoods, and also because I think inevitably that is going to increase the risk of some of the concerns our public commenter, whose name I've forgotten, raised. But I also think that if we want high quality input from a lot of people so that the overall enterprise is really well informed on a community basis, then engaging people on a neighborhood specific basis is a really good way to get them to turn out and talk. Because people, I believe, I could be wrong, but I think they're going to be much more motivated to participate in this kind of process if it's an opportunity to talk about the universe of their neighborhood as opposed to something that's perceived as an opportunity to talk about the city at large. So I like John's suggestion in that regard, although again, not because I think neighborhood-specific guidelines are necessarily a desirable result.
Yeah, I recognize the risk, I think, that you're worried about, and that does add to the complexity. On the other hand, just in the past couple months, we've seen projects that, let me name one of the house on Pratt Avenue. It was 2-story, abutting what is a 1-story neighborhood. And the 1-story neighborhood came out and weren't happy about the 2-story project. With some discussion with the project proponent and their design team and the city council and the neighbors in the 1-story neighborhood, we came up with, I think, what everybody agrees is a reasonable solution. I think that kind of thing might become part of the design guidelines. I'm not thinking of design guidelines that says, well, all you can do in there is San Francisco Italianate and that's it. I'm thinking some broader strokes for some of these areas where things that are design but may not be as detail-oriented as, oh, well, this has to be this kind of gingerbread. I'm not interested, nor do I think we can proceed on such a basis, but I think some broad strokes on the neighborhood level would certainly help some of these issues that we've been faced with and the community faces daily.
The funny thing about all of this is the aspect of fashion that goes in and out of building and design and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you look around the town and it seems like in the late 80s, early 90s, everybody decided that they wanted to have a roof that was on all four sides but then have a little peaks in the middle. It's a strange fashion, but it was a fashion of the time or perhaps of the construction. So, and right now, but just about every project we get is board and batten. I mean, it's unbelievable.
That's right.
And that's going to look...
And metal ribbed roofs.
Yeah, totally. And in 5 or 10 years, that's going to be of a time, and they'll be, and the question is, the way people live changes. And, for example, 10 or 15 years ago, everybody was running Cat5 wire through their homes. Well, now nobody's doing that because of Wi-Fi.
Right.
And it used to be that you had all these different cables besides electric coming into your home. Well, now you just need one. You don't need AT&T and then Comcast and then Dish and this. I mean, you have one sort of connection to the world. So whatever we decide to do, I would encourage us to try and think about the fact that we don't know how people will want to live in the future while trying to maintain aspects of what makes this town pretty cool.
Well, what's wrong with having those fashions? I mean, that's the history of the town.
Nothing at all. But you don't want to put in amber where from now on, board and as Commissioner Pont was saying.
No. Yeah.
But at any rate, I mean, that's I think what Mr. Park, our public commentator, was talking about is that if you start getting extremely specific, you take away
no garages in the front.
Yeah. much of the flexibility.
Boxes, little boxes.
Yeah. And heck, I mean, as long as we can come up with some sense of materials and, I mean, I'm all for quality, this, quality, that. I think in a way we're almost trapped in that because of how expensive it is to build here.
Well, in relationship to that, I also think we need a storyboard on with the colors and samples of what they're going to use. I mean, this looking at these pictures that somebody's played games with don't really do it for me. And I, for a while, was insisting on that, and I've stopped lately. But I'm about to do it again, I think.
I don't think we should micromanage. I remember you said one night, people should be able to build a house they want to build, as long as it's within the, with guidelines of the ordinance and so forth, and there's something to be said for that. But
and to me as well, just to make sure that we're holding people to a higher standard that's appropriate for our town. I'm fine with second home owners and flippers, and I just want to make sure that, people are held to the standards that we're expecting. For the people that live here on a day-to-day, year-in, year-out basis.
And we have to monitor them, and we don't do that very often.
Well, I think the safety standards are most important.
Monitoring. I mean, I don't want to be a NIMBY, and everyone's having to peer over their fence. But good neighbors are about good fences, and if there are things that are issues. Raising it with staff or raising it. People come up to me all the time now and ask about certain projects, which I'm fine to hear, although most of these, of course, are far before I joined in. And all we can do is make this as transparent and as straightforward as possible. I think I'm less concerned about Mr. Park's concerns because I don't think we'll go as far as he's concerned will go, but I like having direction. I like having input from design professionals, and I'd like to extend that also, Mr. Hausch, to design professionals and construction professionals in town.
Well,
that'd be useful.
I mean, there's an opportunity for us to think about, character of the community. I think, From an elevated view. I actually think it's important to do that. As we've been talking, I've been, thinking about how we got to design review in the first place and what the town was like. For example, when I first moved here in 1979, the historic west side of town has generally been the most valued location residentially, and for a variety of reasons, but certainly there seems to be a lot of support for the aesthetic that it presents, and a lot of concern when structures, new homes have gone in that have somehow conflicted with what people perceive to be the pattern and the aesthetic there. And I think about that, and I think, that historic pattern of development is actually pretty haphazard. It covers a wide range of time. It covers a wide range of style. It covers a wide range of cost. So, when I was young and dragging hoses around wine cellars, I was living in the single-wall construction homes built in the 1870s and 1880s, and I don't even know if they were necessarily intended to be year-round residences. It was always a bit unclear to me. Today, they are part of the historic fabric of the community until they're torn down as part of the gentrification process. I mean, or remodeled really beyond recognition as part of that process. We are seeing real influences from architectural fashion. We're in a period right now of, I'd say, a fairly intensive wave of gentrification's a convenient word. I'm not sure it fits perfectly, but one of the things that's changed is just the value of the land. We got into design review in this community when the incentive or impulse to maximize the square footage of house on a lot led to results that people found offensive. And that, is a combination of changing lifestyles. People lived comfortably in much smaller spaces 50, 60, 70 years ago than they do today, or at least than a lot of people do today. It's certainly not what people aspire to in terms of a floor plan, I would say, has changed dramatically. But when you take that larger vision of what a home should be and you layer it over historic lot sizes, a subdivision map, if you will, that was created with an entirely different residential aesthetic in mind, then you end up with the kind of issues that we had. The floor area ratio was a first step. We adopted that before we had any design review in an attempt to come to grips with some of those concerns, and then eventually we came to the design review process. But I think about that, and I think about fashions and the sort of startling similarity in terms of finishes and roof treatments that we see, say, over the last few years as compared with a decade ago. And I think, myself, if we're trying to do something that respects the character of the community over a long period of time, then we want things to be more different than similar. That part of what we're seeing is not enough differentiation rather than too much. This is just my own reaction. But that is a perspective that will be in conflict in important ways with the concern of neighbors that new homes not look and feel disruptive which I think is in a broad sense what generates the most negative response, beyond the very specific concerns we get when someone's bedroom is exposed to a view from up above and that sort of thing. That's very, boundary specific. When sometimes the reaction is much broader because the home really feels disruptive to a whole neighborhood. I don't know how we're going to make it all work, but I think if we manage to have all of these things in mind, we'll do a good job. And I'm looking forward to working on it.
It seems to me like it's a not necessarily a conflict, but should we be staff and commission driven or citizen driven, public driven? What people want. Right.
So you'll see the work plan. The intent is really to take a lot of input from citizens regarding what they love about this community, and be able to distill that into things that guide future construction within the town.
Oh, right. I mean, I didn't finish my thought because that's okay. Because I'm thinking of you, because you're the staff is in this position. They hear us respond to houses not fitting into the neighborhood. So then you're going to say, maybe, I don't know what you say, but the neighborhood, most people have this kind of roof, and if that might be a way to go. I don't know how much what we say here influence what you say to the people who are designing things, and how much we should, the balance between what's coming from them and what's coming from us and what it should be. And I don't know if that's...
It influences it significantly, because ultimately, if they're coming before you for a decision, I'm trying to also take 5 individuals' input that I receive on a every 2-week basis and communicate that to folks who are saying, what do I need to do? How do I implement these standards? But separate from that, this is also, again, I was getting back to the point of, you talk to people and they talk about, I love this town, and you're saying, okay, well, why do that? And then we're going to try to tease that out. Is it wide sidewalks? Is it walkability? Is it tree-lined streets? Is it front porches that engage with the streetscape? It's those types of things. Context is one element, but that's where you get into some of the concerns that Mr. Park referenced of if you try to homogenize context, then it can be a slippery slope. And so this is going to be a challenging project. Again, staff's looking at it as being foundational, and also to his point, we want to be careful. We're not. It's going to be an incremental step, and in government, it is always good to do things incrementally because it allows you to address the unintended consequences that always come up, and it keeps those consequences hopefully small enough to where you can tackle them in bite size.
And I'm just going to go back and say I think your comments, Noah, really, for me, emphasize the value of following John's suggestion in terms of neighborhood-specific outreach, because I'm pretty sure the kinds of answers we get to those questions about what do you love about St. Helena are going to be different neighborhood to neighborhood if the response is, well, what do you love about this neighborhood? Mm-hmm. And because the different and I think people who live in neighborhoods that were developed in a relatively short period of time, where there's a lot of homogeneity already, are more likely to value that than people like myself who've lived for decades in a neighborhood that was developed haphazardly over 100 years. And
we'll
so,
see.
I'm more inclined to prefer a lot of difference rather than a lot of similarity. So, and I think as a commission, we want the full range so that we can then tackle the challenge of incorporating those values into a useful, workable set of standards.
Well, any commissioner willing or interested in hosting a meeting, let me know.
What do you mean?
Oh, shit.
What do you mean?
At your home.
House, Lester.
I will. I totally will. You're not joking.
No, absolutely not.
Okay. I think we all should. We all live in different neighborhoods, don't we?
I mean, this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be simple. Some of it we have to do. Some of it we don't have to do. But I think if we approach this looking at it as what the community wants, what we think will work, what the professionals believe they need, we could potentially come out with something here that's useful to all those groups. I don't know how easy it's going to be to tease out those things that people like in St. Helena, and I don't know how they will apply to design codes, but if you're able to do that, more power to you. I'm aware there's areas in town where people do not want sidewalks, literally. There's areas where they want more, and sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes it doesn't. So we're going to have a lot of sifting and weighing to do, and I hope we're able to make the good and proper decisions. But whatever happening, they're all meeting at Lester's house to talk about the design guidelines.
Another thought, if Joshua Park is watching at home, we can't remove entirely the mixed signals that we give to designers and builders, because it's a dynamic process, and guess what? It's meant to be. Because think about that project that we approved tonight, where they canvassed all their neighbors, and guess what? It's for others, if it was a 2-story house or if there were windows in weird places, we would have had issues. But guess what? In that case, it seemed to fit very nicely amidst the existing.
Because she wanted to fit in the neighborhood.
She did. Yeah. So I'm less worried about sort of confusion on the design professionals' part. Maybe there's some things we can do to help address that, but it's a human process. So.
And again, just remember there is no budget for this project.
Well, you get what you pay for.
I hope to not implement that expectation with this process.
The meeting's adjourned.